will actually see the notice being recorded. So welcome everybody. It's Tuesday today, March 31st. So happy to have our third ever Stand for Israel meeting and having it in the distance meeting because of the situation right now. I hope we're gonna very soon we'll be back, all of us together in the same room. So interaction will be better, but we will try to make that meeting as fun and interactive as possible. As always, I want to thank all our speakers, and actually I'm gonna, for that, I'm gonna bring up my official slide that I'm using when we start every meeting, and I'm sharing it with you right now. And let me just move it, hide it here. And yes, so that's our third distance learning. The topic today will be Christian Zionism with JoAnn, but I'm also going to give you some update about the results from the Israeli election. I want to thank all their sponsoring organizations as always, and I want to thank, of course, Pastor Mac and Pastor Lynn and Living Word for actually hosting these events on an ongoing basis. And Dave and Nancy Smith that are always on and always volunteering and always helping, and they're always the first one there when we're actually doing that meeting physically in the building. And of course to my partners, JoAnn and Deb. And who is here? We already know because we have that over at Zoom. So today I'm going to give you an Israeli elections update. JoAnn will do a Christian Zionism class, and after that we're going to have the quiz like last week, that fun quiz. So you better listen to her very carefully when she talks about it. And of course, I'm just going to mention that we have an updated resources page for an example. Right now, you should have there the video from last week. I just finished doing it today. And the way I did that is in the description of the video, you can jump to different places within the video. So you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can go to a specific places that you want to go within so there's like a table of contents in the video. So as I said, we are recording. And as I said before, if you don't want to be seen or don't want to be heard, then please turn off, as I said, turn off your video, mute yourself. And so you will not be a part of the recording. And I'm starting with the elections. I'm going to go over some slides I'm going to skip some slides that we have done before and go to the bottom line because we had this unbelievable, surprising
we are
development.
Still getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I think you need to mute everybody.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody, okay?
Yeah.
Hold on.
It sounds like somebody's in a car.
Hold on.
I think it's better.
Okay. Good. So I think now it's better. JoAnn, can you do with your head like that? If it's better? Good. Good. Wonderful. I'm going to. Okay. So what happened? The results of the elections, and if I'm going to, and again, I'm going to go very quick on that because some of that we already covered in the previous one, is what you have here on the left side are the different parties and lists that actually considered to be traditionally either center left or left. And the total came as a representation in the Knesset after the elections was almost 46%. And that whole block here on the left was headed by a person that his name is Gantz. On the right and center right, which was led, the major leader there was Netanyahu. All the different parties there received a total of about 54% of the votes. The problem was, as you can see, the reason that I put the asterisk in here, that one party that is almost 6%, meaning that without them, actually, Netanyahu doesn't have a majority, didn't like the Jewish ultra-Orthodox religious parties, even so they're kind of, both of them on the right, but they're not kind of getting along together. And also the leader of Israel Our Home had an issues with Netanyahu, have all these charges, and he thought that a prime minister should not be a one that have as many charges as Netanyahu has. So on the other hand, on the left, center left, the Arabs, where you see I put the two asterisks in here that represent about 12.5%, they have representation in the Knesset, that this is the only parties that are not considered to be a non-Zionist parties, and therefore typically none of the other parties like to work with them. This is why in the previous two elections that happened like all in 1 year, there was no decision. Because even so, Netanyahu, meaning the right, have some majority among themselves, they couldn't get to an agreement regarding a government. And the left just didn't have enough. So that was the situation at the end of the elections. The next step was each party goes and tell the president of Israel who do they think should be the prime minister and have the first opportunity to form a coalition. Usually it's a very important vote. In the previous two times, the first person to get that vote was Netanyahu. What happened this time is when the parties went to give their recommendations to the president, as you can see on the screen, Israel Our Home actually went and gave their vote to Gantz. So actually Gantz got over 50% votes from the Knesset members to saying he's the one that should have the first options to go and form a government. That's actually created a situation in the Israeli Knesset where Gantz and some of his other partners were going to go and pass laws which legally will not allow Netanyahu to serve as a prime minister. We've talked about it again in the past. There are 4 different laws. And that's where we stood, where we were last week. In addition to that, all that bloc that is now under Gantz, that is over 50%, we're going to have their own chairman. They're going to kick the current chairman, which was a Netanyahu person of the Knesset. They're going to put their own person. So actually these laws that they wanted to pass, that Netanyahu cannot serve as a prime minister, that they will have a chairman that actually will bring these laws to a vote. Because otherwise they would not have come to a vote and it will get stuck somewhere. So the situation last week didn't look good for Netanyahu. It looks like they're going to legally block him from even trying to become a prime minister. And actually they had a majority to do that. What happened 2 days after we met, something amazing happened. It was in 3 hours. Is Gantz realized that if he passes these laws, even after passing these laws, there's no way that he can form a government within Netanyahu. He just didn't have enough. The reason was because the same Israel Our Home said that they will never sit with the Arabs together. So if you're going to take away from that 51%, either 6% or 12.5%, it doesn't matter, he realized that he will not be able to form a government again. That means going to a 4th elections. Or it's going to take a lot of time before there will be a decision. At the same time, the situation in Israel, as it is all over the world because of the coronavirus situation, was calling for to have a government as soon as possible and to have what is called an emergency government. So Gantz made a move that took everybody by surprise. He actually decided that he's taking about half of the people that are in blue and white, and he's moving to the right to join Netanyahu in forming a government. So the situation right now, what happened is that you see blue and white is now here in a less, but about half of blue and white actually moved here to join Netanyahu. And now if you do the total of the yellow ones now, you can see that when Gantz and Netanyahu goes together, they're actually having 61% that are kind of almost guaranteed. that even if we will have a party that decided they don't want to go with them, let's say the right party or something like that, they still have majority. So it's a safer majority for that government. So the situation is right now is that the Gantz and Netanyahu are in the final stages of agreeing on a joint government where Netanyahu will be the first prime minister for a year and a half, and then Gantz will replace him as a prime minister. So they're actually going to switch roles. At that time, when Netanyahu is the prime minister, Gantz will be his vice prime minister, and they will share the responsibilities within the government, which is actually like that. Think about it as the executive branch in the US. So both of them will have ministers, either foreign minister, security minister, defense minister, etc. So the situation right now is that it's not a done deal, but it's very close to be done, and it took everybody by surprise. Of course, the other people on the left are very upset with Gantz because he was their leader, and he decided, and his main goal was that Netanyahu will not be a prime minister. But he went and told them, sorry, I'm leaving, I'm taking a bunch of people with me because it's emergency time. I have to put the political rivalry aside. I'm going to join forces with Netanyahu. We need a government. At a time like that, it's emergency time. We need a government. So he put his rivalry with Netanyahu, he moved it to be a second priority. He said that his first priority are the people of Israel, and he believed that's the right direction to go. He actually have majority when there were different polls in Israel regarding his move. Most people in Israel supported his move. So here we go, two people that 3 hours earlier were just like really a big rivalry and who will be the prime minister, decided to join forces and have a unity coalition. And it might be that by the time we meet next week, we have a new government in Israel. Netanyahu is still the prime minister, but Gantz is a part of his government. So this is my update on the Israeli elections. I just want to remind you that to write down that webpage and scroll down to the resource link because, again, I'm sorry, I still have that thing there from last time, but it's mistakenly was there, probably copy and paste. But please write down that URL, matmn.org/SFI. If you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, you'll get a resources page where we keep on updating and also adding videos of our meetings in case you want to see, let's say, last week, 10 minutes presentation about what is Zionism. Before I'm handing it to JoAnn, I want to know that JoAnn is going to give her presentation. And after her presentation, I will help her run a quiz. We actually prepared especially for you a quiz by question and answers that were prepared by JoAnn to see if you actually listened to her when she presented. So you better listen to it carefully. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to actually stop sharing my device and I'm going to unmute all of you for a moment so you can actually tell me if before JoAnn started her presentation, if you have any questions regarding what I just shared with you, regarding the situation in Israel, the political, regarding the government. So you're actually, all of you are unmuted, beside the ones that need to unmute themselves. Some of you need to do that if you need to. So go ahead and ask questions if you have any questions.
Ilan, this is Jolene. I have a question.
Yes.
In the first year and a half, how closely does Gantz have to work with Netanyahu?
Not a lot. There were rivalries.
Right. I mean,
Oh,
so
you mean after that? They're going to be like one. They're going to be in the same cabinet. So they're going to work together very closely.
So they have to get along.
Oh yeah. Meaning they have to get along now, because the way it works in Israel, when they work on creating this coalition agreement, it's a legal agreement. They have to agree about a lot of things they're going to be doing the next 3 years, and their position on the different things. So it's not that they're going to start without talk, meaning as soon as they will announce that they can go and work together as a government, and Netanyahu and Gantz spending most of the days right now talking between themselves, deciding how this government will look like. And as soon as the government is launching, they will be working very closely together too, because they will be a part of the same cabinet, and Gantz will be actually the prime minister. So it's like the president and the vice president. You know, they're actually in the same government, they're in the same, you know, so that we cannot say now in the same building because everybody in their homes, you know, utilizing distance regarding the coronavirus, but they will actually be in the same government. Good question, thank you. Did that answer your question, Jolene?
Yeah, I think so. I was just wondering if they personally don't get along, if there's friction, is that going to be an issue, or if they're, you know, if Gantz is the type of guy that, okay, he can do a 180 and he's going to make it work.
You see, in Israel, because of the way it works, because you don't have one party that wins, it's always coalition of parties, even within the right bloc, not even Lieberman, even other, okay? During the elections and before that, they're like going after another, you think they hate each other, they cannot even sit in the same room. But as soon as they form a government, that all of them are in the same government, they put all the personal issues aside and they're dealing with the government. So it's not a new thing in Israel. Because even the ones that are on the same side during the election, they're fighting for the same vote. Do you see what I mean? So if you have, imagine that you have 3 Republican parties in the US, and none of them will get 50%. So before the election, they're all going to fight with each other because they want your vote, right? But then after the elections are done and they need to work together, then they form a coalition, they find ways to work beautifully with each other, putting all the personal issues aside.
Elon, did you
Yes.
see the question that Dave and Nancy asked? Is Gantz going going to annex the settlements or not?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for catching that, JoAnn. I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at the camera, so I'm looking at you when I'm talking. I didn't pay attention to the chat here on the side. So thank you for noticing that.
Thanks,
But
JoAnn.
Dave, Nancy, we don't know yet. It might be that sometimes when you have a coalition agreement and there's something that the parties cannot agree upon before they actually go into a government together, then they give a freedom for each party to vote when laws have to come to vote as they wish.
Okay.
That's their way kind of dealing with disagreement, saying, you know what, when the vote will come, each person, each member can vote any way they think is appropriate.
It is too early to tell.
Yes.
It really is. Thanks.
Elon,
Yes.
what happens if Netanyahu is convicted? Will Gantz automatically become the prime minister then?
Yes. And again, all this is in, you see, the negotiations that they have right now regarding the coalition agreement, it's always confidential. Only when they reach agreement and they sign it, then it becomes public. So some of the rumors is to create a clause that even if Netanyahu is still under charges and it's Gantz's turn to become the prime minister, that Netanyahu can still be his vice prime minister. And of course, if Netanyahu is being indicted, then my guess is that Gantz immediately becomes the prime minister. That we will know. Again, remember, when they negotiation, it was always like that. When the negotiation taking place, you don't really know. There are only guesses and some rumors and some leaks, you know. But until it's actually signed, only then you know what is exactly included in this coalition agreement.
Thank you.
Any more questions about the Israeli elections or anything about the Israeli update? Good. So I'm happy to hand it to JoAnn.
Well, first you have to help me
Yes.
put my PowerPoint up.
So JoAnn, first, do you have your PowerPoint up in general? Do you have it open in some other window already and in a presentation mode?
I'm just opening it right now.
Okay, open it and put it in a presentation mode and let me know when it is in a presentation mode.
And here it comes. It's up.
Is it like when you start running it, like present? Okay, good.
Yep.
So here's what you want to do. You see
Okay.
at the bottom of our screen, there's a blue green thing saying share screen. At the zoom, if you move your cursor, you see a green square with an arrow up saying share screen.
I have to do that?
Yes.
Okay, well then I have to end this. Okay. Share screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now
And
when
then,
you share screen, find that PowerPoint that you just opened.
yeah, I found it.
Click on it.
Yeah.
And as you click on it, all right.
Can you see it?
You chose the edit mode. You didn't choose the present
Now
mode.
I'm going to do the presenter. There it is. Okay.
Good. Now, JoAnn, your keys forward and backward might work differently than usual.
We're going to have to mute
You see-
because we're getting all that background noise.
Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody beside you and me, okay? Hold on. Let me mute everybody beside you and me. Okay, how do I do that from... okay, hold on. JoAnn, so I'm going to mute everybody, then I want only you to unmute yourself, okay?
John, can you hear me?
Talk, JoAnn, now you can talk.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
JoAnn,
Okay.
I'm going to mute myself in a moment, but what I want you to know that in your presentation,
Yeah.
you move the cursor, just move it. Don't click on anything, just move your cursor.
Yeah,
At the bottom, you should see arrows.
I don't.
The next and previous. You can also start a little laser pointer if you want to show us something. If you see the pointer nearby the arrow to point to the left, that's it. You can click on it.
Uh-huh.
And then laser color, exactly. And you can choose, go down one. Go down, no. The laser, no, not pen.
Okay.
Pen, go there again. Click on that one.
Yeah.
Laser color, go to the bottom.
Oh, okay. Laser
That's
color.
it.
Okay.
That's it. No, go.
Yeah, laser color.
And then do green, let's say.
Okay.
And yeah, good.
But now, is part of the screen take it up with the pictures of us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends. Some of us, it all depends what we have, the setting. Every one of us on the phone, it might be different. On different computers, might be different.
Because it's cutting off a little bit of the screen.
And not for me. I can see, actually, I see everything.
Okay. Well, it's just a bit down the right-hand side, but I guess it's not a big deal. So we're okay to start now?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay. It says my internet connection is unstable, so we'll see what happens. This is a test. But anyway, some of you have seen some of this before. And I'm going to move through it pretty fast but we have to do some background on church history to understand what's happened in the past. My question here, what is Zionism? We learned about that last week from Milan. What is Christian Zionism? Well, we're going to learn about that tonight. And our basic question is that a good thing? I think most of us are here because we do think so, but I've shown this presentation to some people who had questions. So that's how we start. Anyway, I wish we could move this a little bit, but there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it. because these pictures over here are taking up.
JoAnn, it's only on your computer. We can see it all good. It's only on your computer.
Is it okay? Because
What you can do if you want to do, again, there are different view options on the
yeah,
top,
okay,
and also if you take a look at the right side,
uh-huh.
You can like move. There's a line between the people and the PowerPoint, and you can move that line if you want.
Between the people in the PowerPoint? No, not here, there's not.
Yeah, the view, the presenter screen might be somehow different.
Okay, well, we won't worry about it. As long as other people can see it, it's okay. Anyway, our first slide is a picture that I've always loved. I bought a big painting of this in Jerusalem years ago, but it's Moses on top of Mount Sinai holding up the 10 Commandments as though it's a Valentine, and you see the gift box on the ground around him there. And I think that's a good picture of how the Jewish people, when they're really spiritually healthy, feel about the 10 Commandments. They saw the Torah not as a burden, but as a gift. So anyway, we're all interested in reconnecting with our Jewish roots. And nearly everyone we meet in the Gospels is Jewish. Except for, now there's a few people that come to Jesus for help, and there's at least one Roman official who asks to have a healing in his family. But we're not told that those people actually became followers of Jesus. And of course, nobody's a Christian until after the resurrection. So anyway, everybody we meet in the four Gospels in the Bible are Jewish people. The early church is Jewish. They spoke Hebrew, they kept the biblical feasts, and they saw the Torah as a gift and not a burden. And that's news to most American Christians, because we tend to think, oh my goodness, the Jews have to keep Shabbat. They have to eat this way. And if you ask anybody who does those things out of a commitment of the heart, they say, we don't have to do it. We want to do it. So that's one of the first things, if you're going to be a Christian Zionist, you have to understand. Anyway, just a little history. Since the Second Temple period, the land has been ruled by absentee landlords. There's nobody who's ruled the land of Israel since the Jews were no longer in charge who actually lived there. It was the Greeks, the Romans, various Arab groups, but the leaders weren't living there. They were just collecting taxes. And the Romans decided to call it Palestine because that's the Latin way of saying Philistines, and they were trying to insist that the Philistines, who haven't been around lately, were still in charge. So they wanted to disconnect it to disconnect the land from the Jews. And the people who lived there were not called Palestinians until the 1960s, actually. If you asked them who they were Greeks, they were from Syria, they were various places, but they did not see themselves as Palestinians. Again, that's not an argument that nobody ever should, but it is a recent thing. Local residents came from a wide variety of places all over the Near East over a 2,000-year period. And the Crusader influence from the 12th century on, a lot of Christian soldiers from places in Europe came to fight in the land of Israel and mixed in with local Arabs, and therefore you find Arab villages with a lot of little kids with red hair and blue eyes who somehow married one of the Crusader Christians. Anyway, it's been a long run and a lot of mixture has occurred. But from 1517 to 1917, the land, not just Israel, but all the land around it, was ruled by the Ottoman Turks. And the history of anti-Semitism. Well, we figured the early church is Jewish. How did we get to the point where all of the Christians thought they'd replace the Jews? But as the Christians, many of whom were Jewish, but many of whom had become other groups who had become believers in Jesus, as they left the land of Israel, they gradually disconnected from their Jewish roots. And then we begin to see writings of the church fathers, who were mainly Greeks living in the Byzantine territory, in what eventually became called Constantinople. And many of those people really had never been in Israel. They didn't know Jewish people. They began to think, well, God must be finished with the Jews, and now we're in first place. And as history went on, there became a whole series of myths. And when we do the whole study on anti-Semitism, we go into this in depth. But there were things where they believed that Jewish people killed Christian children and drained their blood to make Passover matzah. Now, I think everybody here knows that matzah is made of flour and water and a little salt. There is no meat product at all in matzah, but nevertheless, people in the Middle Ages began to think that. And then they began to have the idea that Jews were sneaking into Christian churches and stabbing the communion wafer. Now, that would be laughable if it wasn't so terrible as far as its results, because Jews were basically trying to live their own little lives, and once they discovered that the Christian church had become an institution and the Christians didn't like them, they just wanted to stay away from the Christians. They were not trying to sneak into churches and do anything. And then, of course, when the big virus happened in the 12th century, 12th and 1300s, and about 1/3 of the world population died at that time. So it was a preview of the I call it the Crusader virus at that time, but it was actually a form of Black Death. The Christians got the idea that what had happened was that the Jews had poisoned their wells, and that's why everybody was getting sick. And then we had passion plays where they usually portrayed the story where the Jews were the villains and everything. And then, of course, Jews were forced to live in ghettos, and the pogroms, which are the organized attacks on Jewish communities where people were killed or tortured. And then there's racial anti-Semitism, and of course it all leads up to the Holocaust. And even after the Holocaust, we're fighting about anti-Semitism again today. So it doesn't go away. So what is Zionism? Well, Elon gave us a really good talk on that last week. Basically, for a definition, Zionism supports the return, or the various returns, of the Jewish people to Zion, to the land of Israel, to the land promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants forever. And one of the questions on the test might have something to do with this, but the first reference in the Bible to the actual word Zion, and in Hebrew it would be pronounced Zion, and this is how it's spelled in Hebrew, is in 2 Samuel. So it's a ways down the line. We're getting out of the original 5 books and into Samuel, but that's the first place it's mentioned. And the verse reads, "Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David." Zion expands in the minds of people as we go on, but it's actually originally the city of David. Well, then we come, we've gotten past the crucifixion and the resurrection and the ascension, and Peter and the disciples are now kind of wandering around the country, waiting to get a phone call from somebody who wants to hear their story. Well, maybe it wasn't a phone call, but anyway, in this particular story in Acts 9 and 10, I just read it in my daily reading recently, and I thought it's such an interesting story. And when you think of it in the terms of Christian Zionism, we meet the first Christian that we know for sure was a Roman soldier, and was really had served in Israel long enough that he really became interested in what the Jews were all about, because he thought they were really living good lives, even Jews who didn't particularly believe in Jesus. But he wanted more information, and he was praying to the God of the Bible. Well, Peter wound up being in the neighborhood because he'd been told to go from Lydda, where he was staying. Today, that's Lud, it's by the airport. to the city of Joppa, which today is Yaffo. And he was asked to come and heal a woman named Dorcas. And he stayed many days, it says, with Simon the tanner. Now, if you've been to Israel and you've stayed overnight in the Tel Aviv area, you usually get to go to the city where Simon the tanner was living and see his house. Well, in Acts 10, then while Peter's in Yaffo, he was called to go to Caesarea. And because the Roman centurion there, named Cornelius, was calling for him. So Peter came with some of his friends, and Cornelius had some of his friends there. And Cornelius said, I've been learning about the Jews, and I've been praying to the God of the Jews, and God spoke to me and said that I should have you come and talk to me. So you're here, tell me all about it. So Peter began to preach to Cornelius and his little group, and they all said, we want to become Christians. And so they prayed and got down on their knees, and Peter and all of his friends laid hands on them. And then it says this, and the believers from among the circumcised, the Jews who had come with Peter, were amazed because the gift of the Holy Spirit was poured out even on the Gentiles, these Roman soldiers. They wanted to have Jesus come into their hearts. And the Jewish believers said, for they knew what was going on because they heard them speaking in tongues and extolling God. Now, as somebody who's a 20th century charismatic, and I think many of you are also, you know about speaking in tongues and visions and dreams and all that good stuff that the Lord sometimes sends along. And I think it's interesting that the first Christian that we meet in the Bible is a charismatic. So if you're into that, you'll be happy to know that it's been around a long time. Anyway, we see a map now of how Christianity grew. In the pink area, these places are becoming main headquarters for Christians. And you've got the Romans in the west, in Rome, and then you've got the Byzantine Christians in the east. They eventually split up. That's a long story, we won't get into all that now. But by the year 325, all of these various places in the pink have become largely Christian areas. Now you'll notice that the eastern part of Europe doesn't come into the Christian world until much later, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But anyway, quick run through Christian history. And we need to make it quick because we don't want to waste too much time. But anyway, by the end of the era of the first apostles, of the 12, John was the one who lived the longest, and he winds up writing the book of Revelation. And then he died on the island of Patmos around the year 100. So the first 100 years, there's, the stuff we read about in the Bible. Then things go on from there. Well, by that time, they've gone to Greece and Rome and various places. And while the Christians are being persecuted as well as the Jews, the Christian church is growing, but it's appealing to people who really never lived in Israel, never really knew the Jews very well. And gradually, they're losing interest in their Jewish roots. So we have the rise of the Byzantine Empire, and in 325, Constantine, who was the Roman emperor, becomes the first Christian emperor. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether he was really a serious Christian or whether he just thought it was good for politics. But it seems as though he really was. I always say we'll find out if his name's on one of the tables at the grand banquet on high. But anyway, in the meantime, I think we can assume that he probably was not a terribly strong Christian, but he thought Christianity was probably a politically good thing for the empire. And so, of course, Rome falls in about 470, and the Christianity grows in the western part of Europe. And then in 600, we've got the beginning of Islam, which becomes an enemy of both the Jews and the Christians. And then then by that time, the Roman Empire is not in charge anymore, and the Byzantine, the Greek Christians, and the Muslims are fighting over the land of Israel for at least the next 500 or 600 years. And in the 9 and 1000s, Christianity comes to Russia and to Eastern Europe. And there's a lot more to that story. But in 1054, the two Christian groups, the East and the West, split. And so the Eastern Orthodox Church rules in the East and the Roman Catholic Church in the West. And all of these things are really interesting stories, but just to give you kind of a sense of, how far away we're getting from our connection with Israel and the Jewish people. In the 1500s and onward, we come to the beginning of the Reformation period, even a little before that, because the Catholic Church had become rather comfortable and often run by people who just wanted to improve their own state of affairs, make money and spend it on themselves. And the serious Christians are really upset about this. And so we see the beginning of what leads up to the Reformation. And one of the big things about the Reformation is it's not that it started with the idea of, hey, we got to get back to our Jewish roots, but people began to see that they were missing a lot of the story and that they needed to really apply the Bible to their lives, and they needed to be able to read it in their own language because everything was in Latin and we were getting to the place where not everybody spoke Latin. So this leads to interest and support of the Jews. Well, most of the early Christians were Jews. The church gradually lost interest in and respect for their Jewish roots and heritage as they moved into the pagan world. So let me go backwards. Okay. These statues are examples of the kind of thing that you see in Christian churches in the Middle Ages. You have the statue of Synagoga on the left. It's a Jewish woman who's blindfolded, leaning on a broken staff, holding the Torah, which is torn, obviously saying God is finished with the Jews. And then you see Ecclesia on the right. She is a powerful woman with a crown and with a cross and looking down upon the Jewish woman. That's the kind of thing people were seeing in churches all the way through this time. So they really couldn't understand why the Jews were still here. They thought they should have gone away. Now, that wasn't always the way. Along the way, in the historical path, occasionally somebody shows up who reads the Old Testament, the original Jewish Bible, and Romans 11, which is a pretty clear statement about what God thinks about the Jews, and they write about it. And Joachim of Fiore was a monk in the 12th century who read the Bible that way and tried to talk about it. Now, most of these people, once they got to the book of Revelation, they thought, gee, it looks like the Jews are supposed to be back in their ancient land. We're missing something here. But most of the institutional church chose to demonize the Jews. And during the 200-year period before the Reformation, we start in 1290, in England, Edward I was the king, and he decided to kick out all the Jews. Then in France in the 1300s, the same thing happened. In Hungary, in the German states, which were mainly known as Prussia in those days, Austria in 1400s, Lithuania in 1400s, Spain in 1492. We know that story. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but that wasn't the only thing that happened that year. They also kicked all the Jews out of Spain. And then many of them went to Portugal, and that lasted for 5 years, and they were kicked out of Portugal. So in most of the countries where the Jews went, they were at first welcomed, then suspected, and later expelled. And most of them moved either to Eastern Europe or to North Africa. And some of them are probably relatives of Elon's, because that's where his parents came from, was North Africa in the 1940s. And this map, by the way, I would be happy to share this PowerPoint with anybody who'd like a copy of it, because there's a lot you want to look at here, but we're just kind of trying to move along quickly. But anyway, this map shows the areas of the expulsions. And in the yellow areas were areas where Jews were forced to leave there and be resettled farther east. So the map's a little confusing, but that's when actually some of the Jews wind up in Poland, and that's I mean, I don't mean the Jews, some of the Christians wind up in Poland, and that's where, you know, all of the Nazi camps were built, but that's also where we're traveling to these days, because there are many Christians in Poland who are very enthused about Israel. But the Ottoman Turks conquered the geographical area of Palestine, that's Israel and all the surrounding areas, and they ruled it up through until the end of World War I. But at this same time frame, in 1517, the Reformation is just getting off in Europe. So the church in Wittenberg, where Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the door in 1517, was also the same year that Suleiman the Magnificent began to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which you see on the right there. And then begins the Reformation. Martin Luther in his early days really was sympathetic to the Jews. He could see why, when the way the current popes, who were the family of the Medicis, who tended to be pretty much self-centered, he said, yeah, well, if I was a Jew, I wouldn't really be interested in being Christian if I thought it was all these crazy popes. But then after he took over, he was a bit impatient, and he thought, well, now I've cleaned up the church, why aren't the Jews all coming in? So he got really angry in his later years and wrote a really nasty little booklet about the Jews and their lies, which was quoted with enthusiasm by Adolf Hitler about 400 years later, 500 years later. Anyway, and then also there's a number of other Reformation heroes, people who really took charge of reforming the church. John Calvin. Calvin was less hostile towards the Jews, but when he was in charge of the city of Vienna in Switzerland, of Geneva in Switzerland, he created a city where there was supposed to be Christian leadership and everybody was supposed to live by biblical principles. And he did not allow Jews to settle in Geneva. So again, even one of the more warm members of the Reformation. So the Reformation didn't start out to make everybody friendly to the Jews. And then of course, there's the Lutherans in Germany. There's the Calvinists and various other, the Presbyterians and various groups that get started in Switzerland and France and Scotland. But Henry VIII was the king of England. He ruled England for 36 years. He wasn't basically motivated by wanting to be more biblical. He wanted to divorce his first wife because she hadn't given him any children. And he wound up going through 6 wives in his search for political alliance, marital bliss, and a healthy male heir. His desire to annul his first marriage without papal approval led to the creation of the separate Church of England, which is called the Anglican Church, and in the US is known as the Episcopalian. So while Luther and Calvin were really biblically motivated, whether they were always right is another question, but they really wanted to be more biblically sound. Henry had some pretty personal ideas, but anyway, the church began, the whole movement of the Reformation gets going in the early 1500s, and it really takes over. And it actually forced the Catholics to have a big conference somewhere later in the mid 1560s and 70s, and they tried to clean up their act too. So today we have both Protestants and Catholics who have a lot in common, and I don't like to teach on this in a way that makes you feel that the Catholics are the villains and we're the nice guys, because we're all human beings in every generation, and nobody actually comes to perfection except Jesus. But even before Luther and some of the main reformers, there were people like Jan Hus in Bohemia, who about 100 or 200, well, he starts about 150 years before the Reformation comes to Germany. And he began with a little group of people to try to make a more biblical kind of religious expression. And the Catholics in his area sent him to the Council of Constance in 1415, and he was burned at the stake. I was excommunicated from a Lutheran church back in 1971 for being a charismatic. And I always said, well, I was really that burned at the stake was against the law in Hennepin County because we didn't wind up in the same place some of these people did. But anyway, his followers were known as Hussites, and they launched a civil war against the Holy Roman Empire, which was running the Catholic Church in that part of Europe. So there's a whole movement beginning. And there were isolated instances of Christians who read the scripture differently. Again, this goes all the way along. Every now and then, somebody shows up who really was interested in where the Jews fit in all of this. But until the Reformation, very few Christians even considered the possibility of a Jewish return to the land. This is a picture of a statue that's been built in Geneva, Switzerland, honoring some of the Calvinist leaders, William Farel, John Calvin, Theodore Beza, John Knox. All of these people are really interesting. Church history is fascinating. Of course, it's what I've studied for the last 40 years, so I think it's fascinating. But anyway, we who are 21st century Christian Zionists are proud to follow in the footsteps of many Bible believers who saw overwhelming evidence in the scripture of God's continuing covenant with the Jewish people and their right to their ancient land. And we'd like to introduce you to a few of those who left these footprints. We may go through this section quickly because there's all of these people are worthy of a lot of discussion, but just to give you an idea who some of them were. Pardon me, I have to take a drink. Well, for instance, Frederick II, who was a king of Prussia, and not a particularly religious person, but was interested, asked his chief general, Hans Joachim von Zieten, in 1699 to 1786. Frederick thought this guy was really an important person and had good ideas about the Bible. And he said to him one day, "Give me proof for the truth of the Bible in 2 words," to which Zieten replied, "Your Majesty, the Jews." And his point was, the Jews are still here. They're still believing that all that interesting stuff in the Old Testament that we've based Christianity on. And so he was one of the people who spoke up. But the 16th century Reformation, the big deal that came out of the Reformation is the English Bible. The King James Bible was translated in 1611. Now, previous to this, remember in 1290, the King of England had kicked out all the Jews. Well, by 1649, when everybody could read the Bible in English, the English Puritans began proposing an act to bring the Jews back and to repent for having kicked them out of England. So again, while the Reformation didn't start in order to repair our relationship with our Jewish brothers and sisters, it did have that effect, because once people began to read the Bible for themselves, they discovered that God seemed to have a lot to say about Israel, and he didn't say that they were going to go away. Now, this is a list of Bible verses that I've just kind of collected that refer to things. So if you just sat down to read the Bible in English and it just came out in your little bookstore, a couple months ago, this is the kind of thing people would be seeing. That the whole world would worship one God, is in Isaiah. The knowledge that God will fill the world is in Isaiah. Isaiah also says the Jewish people will experience eternal joy and gladness. Isaiah again, nations will recognize the wrongs they did to Israel. Zechariah, the people of the world will turn to the Jews for spiritual guidance. It says so in Zechariah 8, look it up. Ruined cities of Israel will be restored, Ezekiel. Weapons of war will be destroyed, Ezekiel. Ezekiel says the temple will be rebuilt. And resuming some of the suspended 613 commandments. The rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Micah's big on that. Isaiah, again, the Jewish people will be gathered from exile and return to Israel. Isaiah and Micah both say the world will eventually be at peace, but not until the Jews are where they're supposed to be. The entire world will serve God together, Zephaniah 3. That's something to look forward to. And the barren land will become abundant and fruitful, So anyway, there's all of these scriptures that once you sit down and read the Bible, you're going to say, I thought the Jews had gone away and God was through with them. Maybe we didn't read the book right. And then there are even some people that you don't exactly admire on other things. Napoleon Bonaparte really got the idea that the Jews were supposed to be back in their ancient land. And in one of the newspapers in France, this was a period when he was trying to take Akko. He got as far as Akko, and he'd been conquering most of Europe. And he thought, okay, and now I'm going to take the Holy Land and I'm going to invite the Jews back. You don't always hear that about him, but in one of the French papers, it said this: Bonaparte has published a proclamation in which he invites all the Jews of Asia and Africa to gather under his flag in order to reestablish ancient Jerusalem. He has already given arms to a great number, and their battalions threaten Aleppo. Obviously, whoever wrote this didn't think that it was a good idea. And Napoleon didn't make it. He conquered Jaffa, he made it to Yaffo, but he retreated before the city of Akko. And his proclamation of a Jewish state was stillborn, and his declaration of equal rights for the Jews was later repealed. But, you got to give a little hand to, it's easy to think that Napoleon was just a pretty self-centered military guy, but he thought that if he could get the Holy Land back in his control, he could bring the Jews back. And he figured it would probably be good for him. And there's people like Henry Finch, who was a member of the British Parliament, who said that he was said to be a true forerunner of modern non-Jewish Zionism. And Holger Pauli, a Danish pietist who believed wholeheartedly in the Jewish return to the Promised Land. John Toland, an Irish participant who had some debates in England in 1714, and he published Reasons for Naturalizing the Jews in Great Britain and Ireland on the same footing as all other nations. So they're beginning to see this whole idea of kicking the Jews out was really not a good move. Menno Simons, who was the founder of the Mennonite movement, he was a Dutch priest who also put a lot of emphasis on the importance of the Jews and the history that was coming up, that they were going to come back to their ancient land. And John Knox, who was a Scottish reformer and one of the founders of Presbyterianism, also believed that the Jews had a place in God's plan and should not be ignored. And of course, then when the Pilgrims come to Plymouth Colony and land on Plymouth Rock, there's Plymouth Rock down in the bottom, and the Mayflower landed up there in that little area in 1621. And the Puritans were very much into Jewish history. They actually saw themselves as the modern Jews, that America was the promised land and they were supposed to take it over and practice biblical lifestyle there. Now, many of these people thought that the Jews would eventually become Christians. We don't know exactly what the future holds. I suspect that when we see things the way God really sees them, that we're all going to be part of a kingdom that will work much differently than what we see right now. But anyway, what you see in this history is people are coming along and gradually reading the Bible and getting the idea that God's not finished with the Jews. I hope my internet isn't going to go away here. Okay, let's see. So the Puritan movement, both in England and America, drew heavily on the Hebrew scriptures as a model for Christian life. And it's interesting when you look along the New England area, so many personal and place names are biblical names. A lot of the cities and towns in ancient Israel appear in early America. And the American Thanksgiving celebration was based on the idea of Sukkot. So the Puritans were reading far enough into the Bible to figure that out. And the third oldest chair at Harvard is the Hancock Professorship in Hebrew. So they really began, now it would have been nice if they'd brought a few Jews in to teach them how to pronounce Hebrew, because it usually doesn't come out just quite right. But anyway, they were trying to do their best to come to this new land and bring the truth of the old Bible stories into the modern world. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Chaim Solomon, but he was a Jewish and Portuguese Jew who migrated to New York from Poland during the period of the American Revolution. And he became the financier of the Continental Army during the American Revolution against Great Britain. And he really sympathized with the Patriot cause, and he joined the New York branch of the Sons of Liberty. And in 1781, when George Washington was broke and the Americans were almost to the point where they were going to have to give up, this guy provided the funds to fight the final battle at Yorktown. So, and really nobody, I don't remember hearing that when I was in school, but later on, a lot of us discovered it as we began to read more about the Jewish background of these things. So Chaim Solomon is really somebody to be honored. And at Yale University, because one of the rabbis had a friendship with Yale's fifth president, Reverend Ezra Stiles, in 1777, Hebrew became a required course in the freshman curriculum at Yale. I don't know if they still teach it at Yale, but anyway, they did then. And the Yale seal, which is pictured here, and the Hebrew words are there if you can read them, the seal uses the words Urim and Thummim, meaning light and truth. So the early American Christians were really into reconstructing Hebrew, reconstructing the Jewish influence. Joseph Ayer in 1771 published a book on the observation upon the prophecies relating to the restoration of the Jews. Everybody in those days liked to have long titles for books. But Warder Cresson was a U.S. Quaker and was the U.S. consul in Jerusalem in 1848. He established an agricultural settlement in the Valley of Rephaim and worked to form Jewish settlements in the Galilee. He eventually converted to Judaism. And Charles Jerome was a divinity student at Cambridge who wrote an essay on the future of the Jewish people in their land based on Genesis 12:1-3, which we all know. And Lord Palmerston in the John Temple, the 1700s, late into the early 1800s, was a British foreign secretary who wrote to the British ambassador in Constantinople, favoring British policy, keeping the Ottoman Empire in power to encourage the Sultan to aid the Jews to return to settle in Palestine. Now, neither the Ottomans or the Sultans were too enthused in that, but anyway, it was a good idea. And Lord Shaftesbury, in the next generation, believed that the Jews were God's ancient people, and he accepted them in the same way that he accepted the Bible. He thought, if you think the Bible's true, the Jews are important. And Galler, who was the senior commander of the Battle of Waterloo and the second governor of Australia, worked with Sir Moses Montefiore, who was working in Israel, to develop Jewish settlements in Israel. Projects include Yemen Moshe, the first neighborhood outside the walls of Jerusalem, and where they used to pay people to stay in those new settlements because it was dangerous. The robbers would come at night, then they'd want to get back in the walled city. But Sir Moses Montefiore is somebody you've heard about if you've been to Israel. And then a woman whose real name was Mary Ann Evans, but went by the pen name of George Eliot, wrote Daniel Deronda, which is a sympathetic account of Zionistic aspirations in the middle 1800s. So again, this stuff is moving along. And let's see here. And there was William Heckler, who lived up until the 1930s. And he was a British clergyman who tutored the son of the Grand Duke of Baden, who became the future German emperor. And that guy, the German emperor, came to visit Israel in the 1890s. But Heckler was a friend of Theodor Herzl. Actually, he had been reading about Herzl and went to his door and knocked on the door and said, "I've come to help you." And Herzl said, "And who are you?" But anyway, actually, Heckler did help him a lot. And anyway, let's see. Oops. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Heckler called for an end to the anti-Semitic spirit of hatred, which is most detrimental to the welfare of all our nations. And he was an honored guest at the first Zionist conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. And then there was John Nelson Darby. He was a founder of a kind of a fringe Christian group called the Plymouth Brethren, and he developed the doctrine of dispensational premillennialism and influenced Cyrus Scofield, who was the guy who edited the Scofield Bible with all the notes. And he taught about the return of the Jews to their land before the Second Advent, and included the idea of the secret rapture of the saints before the tribulation. And those of you who know me know I'm not totally convinced about the secret rapture, but anyway, God will do whatever he wants to do. And it's not necessarily to be a dispensationalist to be a Christian Zionist, but all of these things play into, though, what created Christian Zionism as we know it in America today. Lawrence Oliphant was a British member of Parliament who traveled to the Holy Land and wrote a book called The Land of Galilee, of Gilead rather, outlining a plan to begin Jewish settlement on the east bank of the Jordan. But he employed Naphtali Imber as his secretary, and Naphtali Imber was the guy who wrote the Israeli national anthem, which we need to sing again one of these days. And then there's William Blackstone, who was a Chicago businessman who really influenced President Wilson to accept the Balfour Declaration. He often referred to himself as God's little errand boy. He was running around trying to influence people to think positively about Israel. And Lord Balfour, who was a British statesman, and he's the one who wrote the Balfour Declaration, or put it forth. Both Balfour and Prime Minister Lloyd George were deeply religious and were steeped in the Bible. They were very much in favor of implementing this plan. And the Balfour Declaration called for the establishment in Palestine of a national homeland for the Jewish people. Henry Patterson, again, he fought in World War I and led the 750-man Zion Mule Corps, which were a group of Jews who were living in the land of Israel who served under the British in World War I. And he rejoiced at the Balfour Declaration and wrote, "Christians too have always believed in the fulfillment of prophecy and the restoration of the Jewish people. Nothing like this has ever been known since the days of King Cyrus." And Charles Wingate, who was an intense Bible believer, who served with the British troops in Israel in the 1930s and is remembered as Hayadid, the friend. There are several centers in Israel named after him. He actually trained the Haganah in the fine art of underground fighting. And then there's Walter Loudermilk, who actually, he lived up until the 70s, and he was a U.S. State Department agriculture specialist who was sent to survey land use in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. And he was impressed by what the Jews who fled to Palestine from the hatreds and persecutions of Europe, he wrote, had accomplished in a short period of time. He was astonished to find 300 colonies defying great hardships and applying the principles of cooperation and soil conservation. So again, he's looking at the kibbutz movement as it's getting started in Israel and being really impressed. And then there's G. Douglas Young. Some of you might know of him. I actually knew him. I met him a few years before he died, but he was the founder of the Holy Land Institute on Mount Zion, which today is known as the Jerusalem University College, and of Bridges for Peace, the organization that some of us worked for years. And in 1963, he and his wife moved to Israel. And He also taught at Northwestern College in Minneapolis. He was hired by Billy Graham to head up the Bible department at Northwestern College. And there are Jews here. I met a Jewish man years ago who was in their JCRC office, which was downtown at the time. And Dr. Young came over there and knocked on the door and came in and introduced himself. And he said, I'm teaching over at the Northwestern Bible College, and I'd really like to have someone from your office come and explain Judaism and the feasts and the festivals to my students. And this old man told me years later, he said, after we heard that and scraped ourselves off the floor, we said, "You're who? From where?" Because Northwestern Bible College had been started by the First Baptist Church downtown, where the pastor had been very anti-Israel during World War II. But anyway, Doug Young went to Israel and influenced much of the stuff that a lot of us have been involved in. And he was there in time to be an ambulance driver during the Six-Day War. I heard him speak a couple months before he died. I was at a conference in Jerusalem where he spoke. And I just found this picture online the other day. He's with some of his students up on the Mount Zion in Jerusalem. He takes them out walking around, and I can't read this whole thing because my screen isn't showing it right. But anyway, he basically said our prime mission is to give future Christian leaders a chance to see who the Jews are and what they believe and have contributed. And Frida Keat, who was a news commentator in Israel, a Jewish woman, knew him well. And after he died, she said, for Israelis and especially for Jerusalemites, Douglas Young represents the voice of Christianity, that part of Christianity which understands what Israel is, what Israel does, and what Israel is trying to achieve. For us, he has been truly the builder of bridges, and for this we owe him eternal gratitude. And then there's President Truman and his best friend and business partner in a business that went broke, but they still became good friends. They were friends during the First World War. And his business partner, Eddie Jacobson, was a Jewish guy, and Truman's wife was really anti-Semitic. I don't know why that was, but Harry liked to have his friends over and have a few drinks and play cards every now and then, and she'd never let him invite Eddie over. But anyway, when Truman became president and they were working on getting the American government to agree with the plans to make Israel into a modern state. Some of his Jewish friends sent Eddie to Washington to convince Harry that it was a good thing. And that's an interesting story. But many Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, have taken a strong stand for Zionism and Jewish-Christian relations. Sister Rose Thiering was a Catholic nun who taught at a Catholic college out in New Jersey, and she was also one of the founders of a group that some of us are involved in now called the National Christian Leadership Conference for Israel. And that was a group of, about half of that group were Catholics, and they were very, very supportive. And it's a picture of her down here on the bottom there, talking to Elie Wiesel. She often went to Israel. In fact, I was on a tour group once with her, and she talked to the Catholic bishop of Jerusalem and really chewed him out because he wasn't being faithful to take care of the Jews, and what the heck did he think he was doing anyhow? And I always referred to Sister Rose as my favorite junkyard dog. You know, if she didn't like what you were doing, she told you. But also I've spent a lot of time in Poland, and John Paul II was the Pope for many years there, and he really was very supportive of Israel. In fact, John Paul, when he was a kid, his mother died when he was just 9 years old. And his best friend in school in Warsaw was a Jewish boy whose family took this little kid in and had him over for lunch every day after his mother died, so he'd have someplace to go at noon. And after Carol Wojtyła became John Paul II, the first personal friend he invited to the Vatican was his Catholic friend from Warsaw. And John the 23rd was also a pope who was very supportive of Israel. And I'm not sure if I can read all of this because of the screen, but anyway, shortly before his death, he composed and sent this prayer out to all of the priests in under his leadership. And he said, "We realize now that we no longer see the beauty of thy chosen people and no longer recognize their faces, the features of our firstborn brother. We realize that our brows are branded with the mark of Cain. Centuries long, Abel has lain in blood and tears because we have forgotten thy love. Forgive us the curse which we unjustly laid on the name of the Jews. Forgive us that with our curse we crucified thee a second time." But then we don't want to close off without mentioning Pentecostalism, because as I mentioned originally, the first Christian who wasn't Jewish was also a charismatic who spoke in tongues. And where does Pentecostalism begin? Well, modern Pentecostalism began on January 1st, 1901, in a Bible college in Topeka, Kansas, where a woman named Agnes Osmond spoke in tongues for the first time on New Year's Eve in 1901. And Charles Parham was the president of that Bible college, and he was definitely an early Pentecostal in America. At that time in Kansas, it was still segregated, and he was influencing a young student named William Seymour, but William wasn't allowed to come in and sit in the class. So he looked in through the window and believed in all of this Pentecostal stuff that Parham was teaching. And so William Seymour went out to California and started the Azusa Street Revival, which is regarded as one of the key historical events in the 20th century in the restoration of Pentecostalism. And some of you probably were involved in the charismatic renewal, and I'm sure everybody in this group has heard about it, but broader acceptance of charismatic teachings can be linked to the healing revivals that occurred from 1946 to 1958. Leaders like William Branham and Oral Roberts led to the greater awareness and acceptance of Pentecostal teachings and practices. And in the 1960s, that movement spread to mainline churches. A major player in this spread was David Wilkerson, who was an Assembly of God pastor, and his book, The Cross and the Switchblade, brought Pentecostal experience to the larger Christian world. One key event was in April 3rd, 1960, when an Episcopal priest named Dennis Bennett had a church in Van Nuys, California, recounted his Pentecostal experience to his congregation. Eventually, they threw him out, but he became quite a leader in the charismatic renewal. And the charismatic Catholic renewal began in 1967 at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in Minneapolis in the 60s and 70s, the big renewal here really was started at North Heights Lutheran and at St. Albert the Great Catholic Church in South Minneapolis. And when my little Bible study group was trying to figure out what Pentecostalism was all about, we went to meetings at all of those places. And it is my opinion, I say, that contemporary Christian Zionism as we know it would not exist without the influence of two things: the Reformation and the translation of the English Bible, and the charismatic renewal. And I went on my first trip to Israel in 1977 with a group organized by local Lutheran and Catholic charismatic leaders. Today, there's all kinds of groups. There's the Christians United for Israel, there's International Christian Embassy, the Bridges for Peace, National Christian Leadership Conference, Unity Coalition, and many more. But this is a picture at one of the big charismatic conferences that we had in Minneapolis back in those days. We used to take over the Minneapolis auditorium and everybody would sing and dance and be enthusiastic for several days there. So anyway, you don't have to be self-Christian Zionist. You can, you know, if that sounds like too much. But remember, the Bible is full of promises to bring the Jewish people back to their ancient land. Those who take the Bible seriously will want to support the things that are close to the heart of God. And the Jews are still close to his heart. So that's the end of that.
Thank you, JoAnn. That was good. All of you, please, I'm taking all of you off of, I'm muting all of you so you can all put your hands together. Thanks, JoAnn, for the great presentation. And you can either clap your hands on the screen or, you know, what I realize is that when we do these reactions last week, you see, by the way, I'm going to mute everybody again. That when we do these reactions, that the digital ones, it actually doesn't show it on the screen. So that's why I said, let's do it actually on the video so we can see it. So when JoAnn was preparing for today, I asked her if she wants to do this interactive stuff we did last week. So we're going to quiz all of you, see if you actually listened. I think it was fun last week, don't you think? Like to have that a quiz going on. So if you remember, because I'm going to start it soon, but what I want all of you to do, if you're on a computer, find a tablet or a phone, okay? If you're on a phone, maybe find a computer or a secondary phone, okay? The whole idea is that the screen that you see right now have to stay on whatever device you're using because that's where the question will be displayed. You need the other device to choose the answer. That makes sense. Now, I'm gonna a show of hands on the screen, or you know, I'm gonna unmute all of you. Who was not here last week when we did the quiz? Can I see hands?
I can't remember. There we go.
Deborah?
You can't see me, but this is Gwen. I wasn't here last week.
Okay,
Deborah
Gwen.
Gartley.
Okay, Gwen, can you see us? Are you on a computer?
I can't see. Yeah, I can see you. I'm on a computer.
Okay, good. Do you have a phone with you? A smartphone?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So here's what I want everyone to do on their other device. It doesn't matter if it's a mobile phone, a smartphone, or another computer, or a tablet. Bring up your browser, whatever browser you have. Bring it up, meaning open a browser. And I'll show you which website to go to because I want you to go to this website first. Let me just I bring up that slide. Here it is. You're not going to see me, but I want you to see the website you have to go to on your other device. Remember, not the device that where you see where you have Zoom. You must have some other device, okay? And this is
Kaboot.
hold on.
Oh, that's
Sorry, I just stopped that. Hold on. I mistakenly stopped the share. So it is kahoot.it. Okay, kahoot.it. Do it not on the computer or the device where you have Zoom. Do it on a second one.
What's your internet? So,
Okay, now I'm going to go back so you can see me. It's actually, I'm going to be using Now, did all of you actually get it, right?
That's
You're
right.
good. You're having kahoot.it. You have a screen that is saying, it's asking you to enter. Hold on, let me change my background. So you need to see something, oops, that is look like that. Is that right? Is that what you all have that's asking you to enter a pin, right?
Yes.
Good. Now, so, oh, by the way, you told me last time you liked my Israeli background, so I'm going to put the Israeli beach. Is that better?
Beautiful.
Oh,
Beautiful.
good. We're on the beach at Haifa.
You know, beach and Haifa, exactly. So now I need to give you a pin. So I'm going to generate a new pin just for our game, okay?
Kahoot was up higher. Mhm.
Take me a moment here, okay? Bear with me.
You can say something now because they can hear you.
Hold on, hold on. Okay, I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, before I actually continue, hold on.
749.
Okay, hold on. For the one that didn't play it last week,
749.
you know, you put the pin and then it's going to ask you for a nickname. If you don't want people to know, because people will know what you answer, if you put your real name. In the nickname, if you don't want your name, your actual name to show, you can put a different name, okay? So go for it. So what you need to do, in the first screen, put the pin code 749-637.
8637.
749-8637.
8637.
And then in the next screen, it will ask you for a nickname or whatever name you want to use in that quiz competition. So I see 7 players already on, 8 players are on, 9 players. Actually, I need to get on myself. I'm calling myself the host. We do one thing here. We have 10 players. I'm going to put the pin myself, 749 863 7. Now I'm going to call myself host. So if I win first place, you know it's not fair because I already know the answers. Okay. So we have 11 players now. For the ones that didn't play before, I'm going to start it in a moment. The way it will work, you will see a question appear on the screen. And then the question will go up, and you will see 4 answers. On your phone at the same time, by the way, each answer will be in a different color. You want to look at the answers, decide which answer do you think is the right answer. And then on your phone or on your other device, click the color that fit to the answer you think is the right answer. So again, you're leaving the Zoom screen as it is so you can actually see the questions. And on your other device, you just click the right answer. What will happen after each question, it will show us the rating, how all, I mean, in general, how we all did. On your own phone, it will tell you if you got the answer right or wrong, okay? Everybody ready? I'm gonna start right now. I'm gonna put some music. By the way, last week I read the question up to you, but I know it was cut, like, meaning if I didn't read it fast enough. So I'm gonna let you read the question yourself on the screen and then see the answer. So I'm gonna put some music. So the right answer, the question was, in the Bible, where do we find the first use of the word Zion? The right answer is the book of Samuel, and 9 of us got it right. So let's see what the standing is. And the standing is Navy, I guess it's Dave. He's in first place with 955 points, Barry second with 938, and you see the list there. Now you're all wondering, how come? Because all these 5 got the answer right? Well, what happened here is that the one who choose the answer faster get more points. So actually, if you click it in less than a second, then you'll get 1,000 points. So the one that didn't get it right don't get any points. The one that got it right, getting it based on how quickly they figure out the answer. Now that might tempt you to press quickly a key. Don't do that. You really want to make sure about your answer and then choose the right answer. Because I don't think, now at the same time, if you look at your phone, it will give you some specific information about you. Like for example, it's telling me that I'm in the 7th place. It's mean that I got it correctly, that my answer strike is 1, because all we have is 1, that I'm in the 7th place. You'll see that on your other device, okay, not on the screen. And it's telling me that I'm 65 points behind Gwen. Gwen, you got it much faster than I do. Okay, you ready for the next question, everybody? Let's see it. Remember, we can hear you. Whoever told the answer there. And the right answer, the question was, from what ethnic group did most early Christians come? And the right answer is Jews. And 10 of us got it right. And again, you can look about, okay, so first let's look at the group ranking and let's see what happened here. Well, Navy, Dev, my name's Dave. Still in first place, Barry second place. And again, if you look at your second device where you choose the answers, you will get more specific information about where you stand. Good, let's go to the next question.
Yes.
Guys, I can hear you. Don't say the answer.
Well, I don't have the question up. I don't know what it is.
All right, and the right answer is Cornelius, a centurion, and that's the right answer. 9 of us got it right. And again, you can look at your own personal results on your second device. Now, it's the second time that I heard someone whispering the answer because it's 2 people in the same room. So
I couldn't get my screen up.
So do not talk when you know the answer. Don't talk because others can hear you. Then it's not fair. Okay. So let's go to the next question. Oh, by the way, that's the new standing.
Constantine.
Everybody, no. 10 got it right. The right answer is Constantine. The question was, who was the first Roman emperor to become a Christian? The answer was Constantine. And 10 of us got it right. Let's see how the standing is. No changes in the standing. So I can scroll down if you want to see more, you see?
No, it's the scroll of
Okay.
shame.
Next.
Roll of shame.
Next question is up. In Germany, and 7 of us got it right. And let's see if it changed any changes in the standing. You already see your personal one on your other device. Whoop, there was a change. Something changed there. Uh-oh. I'm in the 5th place. Uh-oh, that's not good. Okay, ready for the next one? Watch your screen for the question. The right answer is JoAnn Tell, I guess. I don't know how to say it in English. The question was, which of these persons was not a supporter of the Reformation? And 5 of us got it right.
That one probably.
Oh, I guess I better start making some mistakes here. Because again, it's not fair because I know the answers. So
Yeah.
disregard the host, okay? Disregard the host.
Elon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that one isn't quite fair because I really didn't talk about that. But Tetzel was the guy who was going around selling indulgences. And I kind of brushed over that in the teaching. So that one wasn't really a fair question.
Oh, that was a trick question, huh?
Well, because I didn't mention it in the
This
teaching.
is Wes. We got it right, so I'll take it.
Hey,
All right. Good. Yeah, yeah. The
Okay.
question is still in, still count. Good. Ready for the next one? Let's go to the next question. And the right answer, well, the question was, who was an early reformer who was executed in Bohemia 100 years before the Reformation began in Germany? Right answer is Jan Hus. 7 of us got it right. Let's see the new standing. All right, we have a new standing in here, some changes. Let's go to the next one. And the right answer is 1900. 6 got it right. And let's see the new standing. The question was, when did Pentecostalism begin in America? The answer is 1900. And the new standing is, here's the new standing. Well, I see there's like a really, really close competition in here. Yeah, let's go to the next question. It's the last one. Wow, that was quick. Wow, that was quick. I'm the only one that got it wrong. Because I wanted to get off the podium. It wasn't fair that I know all the answers in advance. So the question was, what was David Wilkerson's famous book that helped to spread the charismatic renewal? The answer is The Cross and the Switchblade. Switchblade. And actually all of you got it right. So let's see The final standing. Ready for it? Woo! Third place, second place. Wow.
Yay!
First place, gold medal goes to 9 out of 9. Hey! And we have runners up too. Everybody's dancing. I'm moving. I know I'm dancing. Let me stop the music here.
Well, I hope you all enjoy that. I'm not crazy about quizzes, but
Fun. It's really a lot of fun.
That was fun.
May,
Yeah.
may I share, something, Elon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I put up a screen?
Yes.
Let me just pull this up. All right, and then I just have to hit, oh, it went away.
oh dear.
Oh, what do I do? I find it in my computer.
First, you have to make sure that the screen that you want to have on is running, not on Zoom. Run separately, right?
Okay, I've got it pulled up so I can see
Good.
it.
Now, don't close it, but go back to Zoom where you can see me, all of us.
Okay.
Then there's a green thing at the bottom called Share Screen.
Okay.
When you click on it, you get a few different screens. So you need to find the one that you want to share.
It keeps going away on me.
Here it is. Now you're, oh no, you're sharing, no, now you're actually sharing the wrong screen.
Yeah, I'm
Welcome
trying
to
to. All right, let's see.
Oh,
Well,
you had it there.
yeah, did you see it?
For a second, but again, but you have to,
What passed?
now when you do share screen, go to share screen again.
Okay, so I've got to pull it up again.
Yeah.
Oh. All right, can you see that?
No, the share screen disappeared.
Okay.
You have to do share screen again.
Oh, okay. Now, you know what? My computer keeps taking it out to the center of that screen for share screen. So I'll tell everybody what it is.
Right.
I am trying to garnish some free publicity for the upcoming movie, the documentary Never Again. So I created a diorama out of Peeps, and there's a contest at the Twin Cities Star and Tribune. And what I created, it says Never Again. And I need everybody to go there and vote for it. And so you go to twincities.com/peeps.
Okay, what is it? twincities.com/what? Spell it for me.
Peeps, P-E-E-P-S.
Peeps.
Hold on.
Why don't
Each
you
contest?
email it to me?
Okay, hold on. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my screen because I found it. Okay. Is that the one?
Yes.
Okay.
The 2021.
Okay, hold on. So this one,
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody, you need to go to that URL, which I'm going to put for you in the chat soon. Okay, but you go to twincities.com/peeps. Okay, then you click on that one.
You swipe it.
And then you scroll down.
Okay.
And it says Never
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, but I see it like 3 times.
Yeah, it went in 3 times when I entered it. I just need everybody to go vote.
Okay, so the vote on the one that have the most?
Yeah, vote on the one that has the most.
Voted. You see saying voted?
Where do we vote? There?
Yeah, you just click on it and it just increased the voting by 1. And here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to close my screen. Hold on, let me check something here. Yeah. So I'm going to send you a link on the chat. You can go and do it right now if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen sharing. Now, if you go to the chat, you see there's a chat in, you should have an option saying chat.
Mhm.
And I just posted there a link. The chat. So if you click on that link, it will automatically open your browser and bring you to where you need to vote. And if you scroll down there, you'll see now, okay, somebody already, there's another person already voted. That's good. So we have 7 votes because there were 5 when I pulled it up the first time.
For those who aren't aware, this film is the one that's just being put out by CUFI, Christians United for Israel, has published this film. And it's a very important one for everybody to see. So,
All right, it's got to 8 votes now. So you already got 3 today. Okay, guys, we need to get to 15 before I stop it. Otherwise, we're going to keep on hitting it here. Make sure you know it. Actually, you know what? We can keep on doing that because I want to close the recording. So, JoAnn, do you want to wrap up the session so I will stop the recording and then we can still all be here? So go ahead, please. You can wrap up the meeting.
well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope this has been helpful. If anyone would like a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm happy to share it with anyone. And we'll be seeing you again next week. And let's just pray for the Lord's blessing and wisdom on our lives.
Yes.
Lord, we thank you for this time to be together. I thank you for each person that's been patient and has joined this call. And thank you, Lord, for giving us the wisdom, and for Elon, who knows more about it than I do. And I just thank you, Lord, that you've given us this opportunity to share. So we do pray that this time of quarantine would be a blessing to each of us, that we'll read something we might not have read before or see something we might not have seen before, and help us to prepare for the days ahead. So we pray for our state and our nation, and for those all over the world who are quarantined and some of whom are sick and struggling with this disease. And we just pray that you will give us the wisdom to be your servants in this time and place. So we thank you for the honor of being called to be your servant. And we just pray for your guidance in our lives for each of us and our families. And we pray in your name, Lord. Amen.
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 And thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
so much.
Thanks, Elon. But thanks, JoAnn.
Sure. Yep.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All well.